Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Gerald Washington and Adam Kownacki have weighed in ahead of their fight at the Barclays Center. This is going to be a good fight. So this video will be a preview. It'll cover the weigh-in too. They have weighed in now and not too far away. It has been a video I've been meaning to get to all week, but just other things have overtaken it. Life's got in the way, all that sort of stuff. But we'll crack into it. And at the back end, another heavyweight fight is on the card involving Deontay Wilder's brother. So I will briefly mention that. Just more for the novelty value actually, because yeah, he's making a bit of a foray into the heavyweight division. Yeah, I'm not really sure how he will go in the division, but we'll get to that a bit later on. In terms of this fight between Washington and Kownacki, it is the co-main event of this card. Keith Thurman is the headliner. He's facing Josecito Lopez. That's sort of a comeback fight for Thurman, and he sort of said 2019 is going to be a comeback year. He's been out of the ring for, I think they've said it was about 22 months. But the main fight I'm interested in is, of course, this Washington and Kownacki fight. And first glance here, we'll get to the weigh-in first. Any casual who'd be looking at this photo of the weigh-in would go, clearly the guy on the right here, Gerald Washington, the one who looks like the bodybuilder, they would think that he is the favourite for this fight just based on the aesthetic, the way that he looks. You know, he's in shape. He was 243 pounds. But as we know, boxing isn't just about muscles. It's also about, you know, volume, pressure, technique, all sorts of other factors, you know, the intangible stuff too. And Adam Kownacki, he's got some of that, a lot of heart, determination and grit. May not be the body beautiful, but certainly he can slug, and expect this to be a bit of a slugfest. So Kownacki for this fight, 258.5 pounds. So that is actually almost 5 pounds less than he was for his last fight against Charles Martin. And when he was coming up to the scales, I thought, yeah, he looks in slightly better condition. Didn't look as flabby sort of around the midriff, and you know, judging by this photo, you can still sort of see there's some rubble there, but he is in better condition for this fight, and coming in almost 5 pounds lighter demonstrates that as well. And I think he needs to be, because against Martin there was a real red flag in that fight. He started out well, he was sort of dominating the first half of the fight, but in the final 4 rounds or so, he really did start to fade. And against Gerald Washington, he can't afford to do that, especially if Washington can somehow manage to take it late. And because we saw in that fight with Martin, that Martin started to really put it on Kownacki later in the fight. And it looked, you know, especially in that final round, that potentially he may stop him. But Kownacki rallied and almost, you know, stopped Martin. It was one of those sort of seesaw rounds. It was a great final round of that fight. And Kownacki ended up taking the decision. So I'm glad to see that he is in slightly better condition here, because he needed to be. He's been ballooning up in weight since the Artis Bilka fight. He was about 241, 242 pounds for that one from memory. And that actually looked to be, you know, sure, he wasn't in fantastic shape physically to look at, but, you know, 240 odd is much better than 260 odd. And seeing him come in a bit lighter, clearly he's been training and putting the work in. And in the final press conference for this fight, which I've got to say was remarkably brief for a press conference, and even briefer for Washington and Kownacki, Kownacki said that he sparred about 150 rounds for this fight. He said he's been working with Michael Polite Coffee. He's a prospect coming up in the division. He's a hard hitter. Jarrell Miller, his childhood friend, who he said he sparred over 1,000 rounds with in total in his life. And I think the third guy he said was Nkosi Solomon, but it was a little hard to sort of catch that third name because it was a bit muffled. But, you know, Michael Polite Coffee, Jarrell Miller, so he's had some good sparring. And if it is Nkosi Solomon, you know, that's a big, tall guy like Gerald Washington, can mimic some of what Washington can do in this fight, especially the jab, because Gerald Washington, one of the things he's going to have to do in this fight is keep Adam Kownacki off him. He's going to have to use that jab, pump it out there, and he's going to have to, you know, manage the range effectively with this, because if he can't keep Kownacki off him, can't manage the range well, and if he can't follow that jab up with the right hand to, you know, put the hurt on Kownacki, if he can't get Kownacki's respect, well, it's going to probably be another sort of performance that we saw against Jarrell Miller. In that fight, Washington, kind of like the Wilder fight, started off reasonably okay, but as the rounds wore on, the pressure and the volume of Miller in particular started to wear him down. And in the end, he just couldn't take it anymore. and he retired at the end of, I think it was the 8th round. So many people, on the strength of that performance, are picking that Adam Kownacki, who was a very similar fighter to his childhood friend Jarrell Miller, it could play out in a similar manner. Kownacki walking forward, piling on the pressure, throwing a lot of punches, and really just trying to overwhelm Gerald Washington. And there, even though Gerald Washington has recently said that he hasn't got any quit in him, he didn't think about quitting after the Miller fight. Why would he? Because he's worked so hard, yada yada, all that sort of stuff. He did quit in that Jarrell Miller fight. That was obvious. He didn't want it anymore. And he actually said in an interview with the Boxing Voice that he's a much better fighter now, that he's got some new tools, he's been working on some new stuff, and he is going to be using it in this fight. And when he was pressed on that, he didn't want to sort of, give up too much, really just sort of said, well, you're going to have to wait for the fight, because I'm not going to tell you. That's effectively what he was saying. But he was very confident and very bullish about his chances in this fight. And you can sort of, going back to that weigh-in photo here, you can actually see, the height difference is obvious. He's got a bigger reach than Kownacki. If he boxes smart, he might be able to rack up some rounds on the back of his boxing. But how long can Gerald Washington, especially if he's made to work off the back foot, because Kownacki will be marching forward. How long into this fight can he maintain that? I'm just not sure that Gerald Washington is cut out to sort of box off the back foot, for a whole 10 or 12 rounds of a fight. I just can't see it. I think he will end up slowing down at some point, and it's at that point, if he's not getting Kownacki's respect and, putting the hurt on him, really landing something of note, then he could be in trouble here, because we know what Kownacki is going to do. The game plan is very simple. March forward, throw punches, and try to stop the guy. He's done that against a number of guys recently, decent fighters, Iago Kaladze, Artis Bilka, and now that his weight has come back slightly, he might be able to have a bit more gas in the tank, but I'm still a little bit concerned about the weight for Kownacki. I do think that eventually that is going to catch up with him if he can't bring it down. I think, he certainly should be under 250 pounds, because he is a smaller heavyweight when you compare some of the tall timber in the division. He's, that sort of 6'3" mark. That is not, huge these days. And if he's sort of hobbling himself, taking away some stamina and potential athleticism by being bigger, I think, that's got to be something that he's got to work on, because for me, it's a red card. And in that fight against Martin, it really got me thinking about Kownacki and his prospects in the division. And I'm just not convinced that the way he's going, once he steps up, and I'm not saying for the Washington fight, but stepping up to that next tier, because Gerald Washington is a sort of top 30 guy, top 40 guy, maybe top 40 these days. I just don't know if he steps up to the next level, if he's in the condition that he's in, if that's really going to serve him well. He's kind of like Jarrell Miller, but he doesn't quite have some of the same attributes in terms of the deeper the fight goes. This, Miller sort of keeps up with the volume and the stamina, where Kownacki is prone to fading. So if Washington, if he can manage to take the initial onslaught, which we know is going to be coming, he may have a chance in this fight. He can punch. He is a big puncher. Amir Mansour had said previously in a Kiwi Box interview that Washington was the hardest puncher that he'd faced, and he really didn't know his own strength and power. And, in that fight with Jarrell Miller, there was an early instance, might have been the second or third round, where he did catch Miller with something as Miller was striding in, and it momentarily did rock and buzz Jarrell Miller. And that's probably the most hurt, if you could, if we put it in that in those terms, that I've seen Jarrell Miller. It was, something that did actually land, and you could tell it had some effect. But it'll be interesting to see with Jarrell Miller, sidebar here, when he does face, someone who really catches him flush, what's, how that chin is going to hold, because at the moment we don't know. We got a good sort of barometer from that Washington fight, but ultimately he was able to sort of, come through that, outwork Gerald Washington, walk him down, and sort of grind him into the dust. And you can very much see that Adam Kownacki is going to implement a similar game plan here. So it's going to be really interesting to see what can Gerald Washington do different from the Jarrell Miller fight. Because we've seen before, he can start off strong, look good behind the jab, moving around, and then he sort of just tapers off. The activity drops, the movement drops, and he becomes a bit more of a stationary target, and eventually he gets, starts taking some punches, and obviously in that Miller fight he quit, and then the Wilder fight he was knocked out. Although, some of the replays of that knockout potentially looked a little bit premature for the Wilder stoppage, but it was one of those things where after he got knocked down initially by Wilder, it kind of looked like it was only going one way, and against Miller, the later it went, you kind of thought that Washington's not tracking very well in this fight. And I think for this fight, he needs to start strong. He needs to try win those opening couple of rounds, try to outwork Kownacki, and that might be a challenge in itself. But if he can't sort of get a couple of rounds under his belt early on, and if he feels that pressure banking up on him round after round from Adam Kownacki, I'm not sure how he will hold up. And potentially, who knows, we could see another retirement in this fight, or a later stoppage for Kownacki. There's a reason he's the favourite in this fight. Many people question Gerald Washington and his heart. So it will be interesting to see what happens. But Adam Kownacki, the favourite for a reason, probably a 60-40 or 70-30 favourite. But I'm not discounting Washington because he can punch. But I'd also say, whenever I see him in interviews, it's like his voice doesn't match. You see someone, you expect their voice to be or sound a certain way. He's a guy that when I hear him speak, I'm just like, that voice doesn't match the what's actually coming out of his mouth. Anyway, Marcellus Wilder, he is also on this card. He's facing a guy who's, I'll just bring this up here. He's facing a guy who's having his first pro fight. So this is some sort of showcase fight for Marcellus Wilder. Scheduled for 4 rounds. Will Florentino is the opponent. Marcellus Wilder at the moment is 3-0. And I'll just go into his record here. He is currently, all 3 of those first fights have been at cruiserweight. And now and actually some of them he was, 187 pounds, 192 pounds, 189 pounds for his third fight. That was his most recent one on December 1st. He was on the undercard of his brother's pay-per-view event with Tyson Fury. And he's making a foray into the heavyweight division now, moving up from cruiserweight, a couple of fights there. I don't really give him much chance, but there was something funny I saw on Twitter, actually. I'll just bring it up here. Tom Cray saying he saw Marcellus Wilder at the pay-per-view event on December 1st, and effectively summing him up to say that he makes Deontay Wilder look like a decent technician. And I saw that and I thought, that's straight out ruthless. So I haven't seen really any footage of Marcellus Wilder, and I'm kind of treating this as more of a novelty type thing. We've heard Deontay Wilder talk about wanting to fight his brother potentially down the line, and he'd really have to do something and work. He's 29 now, but he'd have to earn that fight for anyone to take it serious. And at the moment, I'm not really taking it serious. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I kind of think this will end up being a bit of a novelty act that'll go on for a while. And as soon as he takes a loss to someone that he was expected to beat, he probably will, retire from the sport. But we'll see. But Marcellus Wilder on the card. But I'm looking forward to this Kownacki and Washington fight. I am picking Adam Kownacki to win this one. But yeah, I have my doubts about Kownacki at the next level. The weight is certainly a red flag for me, but, we'll see how he goes in this fight. And Washington, he's in with a chance. He is a decent puncher. But he's really going to have to try to land something of note early to sort of get Kownacki's respect and get into the fight. Because if he just is walked down and can't absorb the pressure and gets ground down into the dust, we could see another Jarrell Miller sort of retirement later in the fight, or a stoppage of some sort. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.